What if everything you thought you knew about faith, religion, the universe, and success wasn't the whole truth? What if the answers have been in front of us all along, hidden in religion, science, and the very fabric of reality? I grew up in the Bible Belt, surrounded by deep faith, but as I got older, I started questioning. That search led me to study psychology, philosophy, and ultimately law, where I was trained to analyze evidence and think critically. As a prosecutor and later a defense attorney, I built my career on uncovering the truth beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I bring that same investigative mindset to life's biggest questions: faith, spirituality, and the forces that shape our lives. I'm Alexis Austin, and this is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, the search for truth. It's time to uncover the evidence. All right, welcome back. So our last episode ended a little darkly. Hopefully you're able to jump right into this next one. But I promise that there's a reason for going through all of that. And as we talked about on the last episode, if you missed it, we talked about how I came from this very deeply religious Southern experience and experienced molestation as a child and started pulling away from faith and really engaging in just a complete abandonment of everything that I had been taught to believe in. And it was a form of searching, but it was also a form of destructive chaos. The last thing that we talked about was I actually ended up in 2016 in a psychiatric hospital because I had tried to commit suicide. And at that point in time, I was forced to confront the silence. And when I say confront the silence, that was really what I felt it was. I could not have silence. Confronting that silence felt like death to me. It was just, I couldn't be alone with my own thoughts. I would always have sound on. I would always have something going on. I would always be out partying or talking to people or watching TV and numbing my brain. I could not be in silence. And I'm here to tell you, if you're one of those people who can't be in silence, that's not a healthy, normal state. There's something going on either that you're avoiding or that still small voice in you is trying to bring to light and show you. The best thing that you can do, even if it's scary, is sit in silence. Let there be silence so that you can figure out what's going on before it gets too dark. But I digress. In that time, it was the beginning of my evolution into who I was meant to be. So as much as it was painful and as difficult as it was, that dark night of the soul that I went through is what brought me to where I am today. Because in that silence, I started listening. I started listening to myself saying, "What the heck are you doing, Alexis? What are you doing?" Actually, when I talk to myself, I call myself Lex. "What are you doing, Lex? Why are you here?" And I started looking back at the choices I had made and where I had been and really evaluating my life. I mean, near-death experiences will do that, but the silence gave me that opportunity to reflect. And I remember I was sitting on the ground outside during one of the 1 hours of outdoors time we got. And when I say outdoors, it was like in a confined space. It was in a courtyard. But during that time, I remember sitting here thinking, never again. This is not who I am. And it was during that time when I started reconnecting with this thought of there is someone that I am. There is someone deep in me, and this is not who that is. That's when I started opening myself up to the universe, faith, God, and success, because they go hand in hand. Opening yourself up to success and living the life that you're supposed to live automatically opens you up, if you're doing it correctly, to being the best version of yourself, being connected to that inner voice inside you. So I remember thinking, this is not who I am. I will never come back to this place. I am not this person. And when I got out, I hadn't made any life changes. I just made it in my mind. So I stepped out and I went right back into that abusive relationship because where else was I going to go? That's where I lived. But what's interesting is a shift had happened in my mind. And this happens with a number of people that I've talked with when they go through what I call this dark night of the soul. You have this revelation, you have this opening up, but then you step right back into life. And what's interesting is some people, when they go through this, they step back into life and get sucked back in. They let it all consuming, overbearing, just pour on them. And then they end up actually killing themselves or just getting worse and worse and worse and worse. Then there are others who go through this period where they have that quiet time, they have that near-death experience, they have that revelation of self. And yes, you do have to get back to normal life, but there's a change, and you can't quite put your finger on it, but there's a change, and you know there's a change. And that's what I experienced. I went back to the chaotic home that I was living in, the chaotic relationship. And as all things go, there was a little period of calm. There was a little period of relief. I will be honest, it lasted about a month, but I started fooling myself into thinking, okay, maybe I can make it work here. I knew in my soul that I was in the wrong relationship, in the wrong situation, but we trick ourselves. We talk to ourselves. We let our subconscious trick us into thinking, well, let's stay with what's safe. Because as we'll talk about in later episodes, the subconscious is only designed to keep you safe. And I'm putting safe in air quotes there because safe is just what you know. The subconscious doesn't want to do anything that it doesn't know. And even if you're in an abusive relationship, this is what a lot of people don't understand about domestic violence. And I learned this as a prosecutor and also being in this situation myself, is safety is not so much actual physical safety when the subconscious is reaching for staying safe. Safety is, this is what I know. Safety is habit. Safety is doing the same thing over and over and over. Even though you're not happy, it's predictable. So for the subconscious, safety is, do I know what's happening next? Even if what I know is happening next is an argument or getting kicked out of my house or getting physically hurt. If I know it and I can predict it, I feel like I have control. And it is that false sense of control that we hold on to. Predictability is not control. There is no control. You can't control life there. And I don't say that to freak you out. There is a way that you have control, but it's only when you're following that deep inner knowing that's inside of you and having trust and faith in yourself. That's the only place that there is any modicum of control. But having this idea that you can control life because you can predict it, that's a cycle that we have tricked ourselves into thinking, well, it's not as bad as it could be. I can work on it. I can make things better, but I know what's going to happen. So you stay. I was in that position. But like I said, in that small moment of time where I finally sat in silence for a couple of days because it was required and I had nothing else to do, I had unlocked something. I knew that I was meant for something more. I knew that this was not the life that I had chosen or that was going to get me to where I needed to be. But I was stuck. I was comfortable. And I say comfortable not in a happy comfort, but in a predictability. I was in a pattern. I was in a comfortable pattern. And so things got worse. And that often happens. I've talked to so many people who have gone through this process of having a near-death experience or having a dark night of the soul experience. And I think what's happened is in society and in the movies and things, we see this like hero's journey where the person is going through this really terrible, dark situation, and then it's the worst possible place, the rock bottom, like we hear about in Alcoholics Anonymous, and then everything gets better. But that's not how human beings work. We are not a up and down and then up completely forever. We are always experiencing fluctuations. And especially in healing and recovery, you are always faced with that next thing that you have to overcome. It's never everything's just all sunshine and roses. I will tell you, it does get better. And the things that you have to conquer as you go through and you build up are less terrifying safety issues and more challenges like, oh, let's see what I can do with this thing to overcome to reach that next level of awesomeness. But in this place in my life, I was in a worse place than before. My relationship got even worse. It got even more chaotic, sometimes violent. It was terrible. And finally, I got to the point where I looked at myself and I thought, I can't do this anymore. So I reached out to a friend, and my friends had seen me going through this, not nearly to the extent that I was actually going through it, but the friend that I had often been able to go stay at her house, it was a couple friends, so their house, I reached out to them and said, look, I can't do this anymore. And I had moved in with them at least twice before in this relationship. Little did I know that there was a discussion that they had saying, we can't keep letting her do this. We can't keep helping her stay in the cycle. But thank you so much to these two. You know who you are. I said, look, I need help. I need to get out. And they let me move back in. And then they said, look, you've moved in with us now. But my girlfriend said, you need to get an apartment. I'm going to help you get an apartment. And I didn't want to do that because even though I'd made that first step saying, okay, I'm going to get out of this, my subconscious was saying, well, maybe I could go back. Maybe I can make it better. Go back to the safety, go back to the known. But I will forever be grateful to her and her presence in my life because she said, no, we're going to just go. Let's just look. And this is where I started exercising what I call my woo-woo manifestation muscle. It's not really woo-woo. There is a scientific reason behind why this works, which we will get into. But I said, okay, well, let's just look. You're right. I can just look. And then I said to myself, and I did this as a test, honestly. I was testing myself and the universe. I do this a lot. I thought, okay, I'm not going to move out unless I can find the absolute perfect place, because why would I leave a perfectly good home and a perfectly good relationship? I was joking to myself, but a perfectly good relationship for anything but the best. Like, it has to be powerful to make me leave. So I had all these things that I said I had to have. I had to have a apartment filled with sunlight all around. It had to be very clean. It had to be very modern. It had to be out in nature, which I lived in the city. I don't know. I was setting this up to try to make it so that I couldn't find a place. But lo and behold, I put that list together and said, this is what it would take for me to leave. And we found that exact apartment. It was gorgeous. When we stepped through the door, there was sunlight streaming in. It had its own personal garage. It was heated. And next to it was a complete open space. It had never been developed. And it was sitting right there with a full view of Cheyenne Mountain and Pikes Peak. It was heaven. And I thought, this is a sign. I said, this is what I would need to get out, and it's right here. And I jumped. And this is the real point of this story that I've been telling over the past 2 episodes is there are points in your life where you are going to be given the opportunity to jump. This is what it is to make a quantum leap, or in spiritual terms, to act in faith. Faith is not just wishful thinking. And this is where the idea of faith and law of attraction are very similar. People will say, well, I have faith, but then they don't do anything. There's a verse in the Bible that specifically says faith without works is dead. Faith without works is just dreaming, just wishful thinking. Same thing with the law of attraction that we hear circulating all around in these self-help groups. They say, just sit and think about what you want and it'll be drawn to you. That's not real. Sitting and just thinking will bring the opportunity to you, but then you have to take the step. You have to move forward. You have to engage in that opportunity that you drew to you. So that's what I had done. This was my first experience doing this. I said, okay, this is what I want. Well, it's the first time I took note of it. We do it all the time in our lives, but this was the first time I took note of it. And I took the step. To this day, I don't know where I got the courage. I don't know where I got the gumption, except for I had sat in that quiet place back in the hospital and said, I'm not going to stay here. And so this was the step. Now, just because I got the apartment didn't mean I got out of the bad relationship, because I have to complicate the crap out of everything. But I did get out of the bad relationship eventually because I created space in that apartment. Now, this is where, like I was talking about, when you go to that next level, there are going to be things that test you at that next level. So when I got out and I was out of the bad home, I was still flirting with a relationship and going back and talking all the time. It was still not good, but I was getting myself out. I was taking baby steps to where I needed to be safe. Then when you do this and you step out and you take that next step, inevitably something happens. And it's an opportunity to either continue rising or to let everything come crashing back down. That's the nature of taking steps in faith. That's the nature of making a quantum leap. There's always an opportunity to step forward, but there's always going to be a chance once you step forward, there's an opportunity to slide back. What happened with me is I had taken that step. I was getting out. I was starting to exercise again. I was starting to eat healthy again. Everything was starting to be brighter in my life. And then the man that I had been engaged to, now we'd broken off the engagement when I moved out, but we were still talking. Then he killed himself. And he did it in the exact way that I had tried to do it 2 years before. And this was a point in my life when I saw it and I said, okay, I have a choice to make here. I can either be sucked in and destroyed, or I can rise above. Now, I did engage in a very heart-wrenching period of mourning because it was so much involved. Not only the death of someone, he died and his children were in the house. Like, it was a traumatic experience, but not just the trauma of the event, but also coming to terms with everything that surrounded that life and everything that surrounded that relationship. It was a dark period. But this is what I've learned in this journey is when you ask for help, help will come. You may not know where the help's going to come from or how it comes. And at that time, I was not engaging with my faith at all, except that I noticed I was starting to request things of the universe out loud. Now, some might call it praying, some might call it talking to myself, but I went back in the darkest periods of my life. I've always seen that I go back to asking for help from something outside of myself. You can call it the universe, you can call it God, you can call it energy, whatever you want to call it. But that innate desire to reach out for help exists in all of us. And I would reach out and I said, I can't do this alone. I need help. And just as it happens in the way that you reach out, and I call it prayer now, but you never know how your prayer is going to be answered. You never know how what you put out there into the universe is going to come back to you. I said, I need help desperately. And a friend of mine from high school, who I hadn't seen in ages, reached out to me from across the globe. Literally, he was living in a different country. He said, I just got this feeling that you need my help. I'm coming to the US. And he came. He came to the US. I hadn't seen him in years. And he said, we need to get you out of this apartment, out of this funk that you're in. And he and I literally hopped in a car and took off to the Grand Canyon because I'd never been. And it was a 2-week period of silence, which is, again, what I needed. We would drive and turn on music just quietly in the background, and he would let me just be silent. Thank God for him, because I wouldn't have pulled myself out of it otherwise. But it was that period where I was able to get away, to step back, and to breathe. When we came back from the trip, and it was just literally just driving. We just drove thousands and thousands of miles. We would drive to the Four Corners, drive to the Grand Canyon, and there was nothing in this relationship other than this was a friend that I had grown up with that I knew I needed someone. And so I went out and just was able to pull myself away. When I came back, I'll never forget, because he was raised religious as well, not in the same religion that I was raised, but he was raised seeking God. We both came from the Bible Belt. And he asked me, he calls me Lexi. He said, Lexi, have you prayed at all? Do you have a Bible at all? And I didn't. And I hadn't. And he said, I don't recognize you. Because again, we had known each other in high school. And this was, 15 years past that? He said, I don't recognize you. And he didn't mean it in a mean way. He wasn't trying to be hurtful. But I realized I didn't recognize me. And it was at that point that I said, okay, I'm going to dive in and figure out what's been happening in my life, what I need to do next. And I bought a Bible, and then I bought 5 self-help books because I didn't want to be religious. I didn't want to dig into that. I wanted to look at everything together to see, okay, are there fundamental truths in what I was raised to believe versus what actually exists? And I started my journey there. I started reading everything that I could get my hands on. I started listening to audiobooks on success. I started listening to self-help books. And I started just diving in with a voracious hunger for knowledge, trying to understand what I needed to do next. And it was during that period, and I talked about this in a previous episode, where I was still a partner at the law firm. I was still engaged in that. And I was asking the universe, what's next? What do I need to do? How do I be the best version of me? Because I am done living this horrible cycle that I've been engaged in my life. What is next? And that's where, I kid you not, I heard a still small voice saying, jump and I will catch you. And it meant jump and open a law firm, which, looking back, it's ironic because now I'm sitting here on this podcast talking to you about success and faith and spirituality and universal principles. I would have never guessed that opening a law firm would lead me here. But that's the way this works. When you open yourself up to the possibilities and you say, okay, I'm ready. What's next? And you allow yourself to engage in that quiet. Something comes in and you have no idea what it means. You have no idea what it's going to imply. All you know is you either take the opportunity and jump, or you stay stuck. So I don't know. And it gave me shivers. It gives me shivers every time I talk about it because that was not me. It may have been a deep part of my subconscious, but I truly believe it was this force beyond me, within me, outside of me. It's this universal principle. I now think of it as God. But for anybody who doesn't like that idea of that religious connotation of God, the principle still holds. I was told, jump and I'll catch you. And I did. I had no idea what I was doing, but I jumped out and opened a law firm. And at every step of the way, every single step, I got the next thing that I needed just by engaging in quiet and silence and saying, okay, I'm ready. Now, We're going to talk a lot on this podcast about what happens when you don't engage in quiet and silence and let yourself work through the problem and be able to discover the next step, because I have done that a lot too in this journey. But that was the beginning of this journey that I'm currently on with you all now. And that was the beginning of realizing faith and success were intertwined. From that point, everything changed. I literally manifested, prayed, whatever you want to call it, my ideal partner. And I will give you a tip for any of you all seeking a significant other. Be careful what you put on that list, because if you make a list and you go over it every single night before bed and every single morning when you wake up, they will come out exactly as what's on the list. Everything that's on there and anything that you forget to put on there, they may not have. I didn't put on that my husband would be, an international rock star, and he isn't. But he is absolutely everything I put on that list, because when you are intentional about what you want and you open yourself up to receiving it, you never know where it's going to come from, but it will come. And that's what I started learning, is when you put that intention out there and you start being very intentional about what you're going towards without holding on with a stranglehold as to how it needs to happen, the universe unfolds. And as I started going through this process, building my law firm, having those next steps fall into place, I can't even, it would take the entire podcast probably to talk about every single time something has fallen into place for me now. I was able to find the perfect car randomly, like just the perfect house with the exact door that I had. It just falls into place every single time. And what I've learned is, when you open up and you learn these universal principles, you can understand not how the woo-woo works, because a lot of people talk about these principles and say, well, just sit and manifest. It's not so much manifestation. We use those terms because it's easy to digest for people, but there are principles underlying how this works that explains everything about how these seemingly magical things happen. It's not magic. It is founded in the universal laws that bring forth these results. And when I say universal laws, again, I'm not trying to be woo-woo or crazy. They actually make sense on a scientific and religious scale. If you look at, and we'll dive into some of this, if you look at the teachings of Christianity or any of the main religions, you see these principles throughout. And then if you turn and you look to science, specifically quantum physics and quantum mechanics, it all lines up and it's all connected to bring these results to you. What I am doing with this podcast is I'm bringing you, number one, these past 2 episodes were to tell you who I am and where I came from. But then I want you to have that base and understand that from those principles, you can learn anything you need to move to the next stage in life, anything you need to accomplish what it is that you've always wanted to do, or anything you need to figure out what it is you want to do. These principles that we're going to go over, and I'm going to pull them out and show them to you over and over and over again, because the idea is, if you're anything like me, your brain, especially if you've worked as hard as I did to make your brain very, very logical, your logical brain may not want to go into any kind of woo-woo, crazy spirituality kind of stuff, and that's fine. You do not have to. But what you'll find is these principles hold true if you're looking at it from a logical perspective. You're looking at it from a philosophical perspective of, okay, logically, this is how this works. Or you're looking at it from a quantum mechanics perspective. This is how the universe works, as far as just even down to an atomic level, how you have all of these things involved in bringing about certain results that you didn't realize, because quantum mechanics can kind of sound a little out there and very, very deep. I don't claim to be an expert. I don't have a physics degree, but I know enough to be able to explain the basic principles. And it's fascinating because when you look at things like manifestation or prayer or any of these great teachings, they're all saying the exact same thing. There are fundamental laws of the universe that exist, that if you learn what they are and how to work with them, your potential is unlimited. You can literally do anything. You can be anything. And I don't say this to be woo-woo or crazy or anything like that. I'm telling you from personal experience, coming from a very left brain logical thinker who completely resisted and ran away from everything spiritual. These principles work as long as you are open to learning them and seeing how they all connect. So that's my promise to you. If you've stuck with me this long, I am so excited to start diving into those principles with you. We're going to be looking at different texts, different ideas, different teachings, and showing how they're all connected to that underlying truth of the universe. This is Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, a search for truth. I'm your host, Alexis Austin, and I'm so excited to go on this journey with you.